Good afternoon. If you're just joining us, we'll get started in just a minute or two. Still seeing people jump on. All right, I see that slowing down a little bit, so we'll go ahead and get started as people continue to join us, but want to make sure we have enough time for our conversation this afternoon. So good afternoon again, and welcome to our webinar on strategies for supporting a multi-generational workforce. I'm Melissa Keene. I'm a senior program manager with the Institute for Local Government, and I will be your host and moderator this afternoon. Just a couple of quick housekeeping overviews before we jump in. You probably have noticed you're muted, and we are going to keep the audience muted for this webinar since we have a pretty big attendee list, but that doesn't mean you can't ask us questions. So you should see a Q&A box on the bottom of your screen in your control panel. Please feel free to drop any kind of questions into the Q&A box at any time during the session. We will be monitoring that and adding it to our queue of questions that we'll go through during our panel conversation and Q&A session. If you have any logistical or tech issues, please feel free to put those into the chat box. We're also keeping an eye on that as needed. So please notify us if any issues that are coming up through that venue. But like I said, we will be monitoring both and keeping an eye on the Q&A box and adding those to the queue. And we all are also recording this session that you probably noticed when you jumped on, and we will be sharing that recording along with all of the materials that we talk about within the next few days. I just want to share a little bit about ILG if you aren't super familiar with us before we jump in. So we are a nonprofit affiliate of the League of California Cities, the California State Association of Counties, and the California Special Districts Association. So we work together with our affiliates to serve cities, counties, and special districts statewide and really provide practical, easy to use resources so that you all and local agencies can more effectively implement policies on the ground. We do that in a number of ways. We do a lot of education and training like this webinar. We also do conference sessions and in-person trainings. We provide technical assistance for local agencies across the state, capacity building and convening services, and also have a host of resources on our website that are free for you all to access. We focus on four main areas. We have a pillar on leadership and governance, which is some of the basics. We do the ethics trainings that are required for local agencies, and a lot of information on how to be an effective governance team, an effective council and board, and how to work with staff and work with each other and run effective meetings and things like that. Our civics education and workforce pillar, which this webinar is a part of, is really dedicated to trying to help create a pipeline to public service, get young folks interested in local government as a career path, help local agencies navigate some of the retention and recruitment challenges that we know are front and center for a lot of you right now. We also have a program focused on public engagement, which really helps embed public engagement into local government operations and think about it more strategically and holistically instead of just one-off opportunities, really being more authentic and again, proactive and strategic in that space. So we do a lot of training, have a lot of resources on how to handle difficult meetings, how to use technology effectively, how to have hybrid meetings and hybrid engagement and things like that. And then lastly, our sustainable and resilient communities pillar focuses a lot on climate action and climate resilience, land use and housing. We run a program that's dedicated to honoring the voluntary efforts of local agencies around energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reductions. So if you aren't familiar with the breadth of what we do, definitely encourage you to check out our website and a lot of the free resources and upcoming trainings that we have available to you all. Here's a quick agenda for what we're going to do today. So we're doing the welcome right now, and then we're going to do a polling exercise just to get some demographic information about who's in the room. And then we're going to share some data and trends with you all in terms of at the national level as well as the California level around who's in the workforce and what that really looks like. We're actually going to do a second polling exercise then about some generational differences and what that looks like and some of the stereotypes. And then we're going to spend a lot of today's session around in a panel discussion with our esteemed panelists, where we will also work in some Q&A from you all in the audience. And then we'll share some additional resources and get you out of here by 2:30. So I want to quickly introduce our panelists today, and they will introduce themselves in more detail when they jump into their parts of the presentation. But we're joined by Deborah Sabatini-Henley, who's the founder and president of Resulti, Rich Oppenheim, who's the Administrative Services Manager with Regional Government Services, and Sophia Selovanoff, who's the Executive Director with Regional Government Services. So as I mentioned, we are going to start off with a quick Zoom poll. Seth, do you mind launching that poll for us? Perfect, thank you. So hopefully you all see that pop up on your screen. First, we're curious what kind of agency you're with. Are you with a city, a county, a special district, or other? Maybe you're with the state or a nonprofit. And then what region of California are you from? Just to give us some demographic, geographic data. And then lastly, what generation are you with? We'll give a couple minutes here. About almost 80% of people, so maybe just a few more seconds to let people respond. Looks like almost everybody. So let's go ahead and end this and we'll share the results. All right. So it looks like about half of the folks on the line are joining us from a city, another 23% from a county, and about 8% with a special district, leaving about 15% of you from other agencies. In terms of geographic breakdown, 36% from the Bay Area, 10% from Central California, 3% from the far north, 13% from the greater Sacramento area, 5% from the Inland Empire Desert, 18% from LA, 4% from Orange County, 12% from San Diego, none from the Central Coast. And then lastly, the breakdown of the generations on the line. So we have 1% from the traditionalist generation, 13% baby boomers, 48% Gen X, 37% millennials, and then 2% Gen Z. Thank you so much for sharing. That helps kind of inform our conversation in terms of who's on the line and some of the questions that might be popping up. So appreciate you taking the time to do that. So we're going to just jump into some of the data and trends to set the stage for today's conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to Deb, who's going to talk about some of the national data, and then we'll turn it over to RGS to talk through some of the more localized data.
Okay, great. And did you want me to introduce myself a little bit, or?
Please feel free, yes.
Okay. So I'm delighted to be with you all today. Debbie Henley. My consulting firm is called Resulti because we help organizations and people build resilience. Our backgrounds are in ethics and compliance and organizational culture. I actually started my professional life as a civil and environmental engineer, supervising construction for Exxon of service stations. So I became very familiar with local and county government right out of college, and have great respect for all that you're doing in all of the municipalities and counties that you're working in, and especially after a hurricane, and for some of you, an earthquake. So I hope you're all safe and dry. We've been doing work with teams and organizations, and working on everything from ethical leadership to inclusion, and across the board, there are generational differences and issues that have come up. So you'll see sort of as we go through this, there are lots of stereotypes and in some cases assumptions and misunderstandings that can get in the way of working effectively as a team. So for starters, we're going to share with you some data to set the stage, some demographic data. First, just big picture. What we know is that the working age population in the US, which is, in this case, and this is just demographically the way numbers are collected, from 16 to 64 is contracting. Why is that? Well, we have a traditionalist and baby boom generations who are leaving the workforce, and the generations that follow us. I'm a 1960 baby boomer, so that's why I can say us. But the generations that follow us are getting increasingly smaller. While there is sort of a baby boom echo in the millennial generation, Gen Z is approximately 3 million smaller than the millennial population, and Gen Alpha, which is the one younger than Gen Z, smaller. So working age population contracting just means there are fewer and fewer people entering the workforce and more leaving it. Population aging means that we have more, we have a higher death rate than a birth rate, basically. And what I've got here in the bullet point is that people who are older than 65 will outnumber those who are younger than 18 by 2034. I know that another data point we share quite often is that by 2030, more than 35 countries will have 1 in 5 people in their populations over 65. So lots of older people, not enough younger people filling their spots at work. That's basically what those two tell us. And so to future-proof our organizations, we need to figure out how to continue to hold on to the older generations in ways that are engaging for them, effective for the organization, but also support collaboration and communication across all 5 of these generations that are in our workplaces. I know we're going to now talk about California, so bring it down from sort of big picture.
Perfect. Thank you for setting the stage, and we'll turn it over to Rich and Sophia to talk a little bit more about the California trends.
So good afternoon. I'm Sophia Sullivanov. I'm the Executive Director of Regional Government Services. We are a JPA that provides support services to public agencies throughout California. We may have worked with you or one of your neighbors, and really appreciate that opportunity. My background is in human resources, and Rich, who's going to walk you through some of our data, is our training service line leader as well as our internal administrative service manager. So he's had a lot of exposure to multi-generational groups in training environments, and I think that really enhances his thought process here. So Rich.
Great, thanks, Sophia. Appreciate that. If we can go to the next slide, I wanted to sort of show our approach here. And what we did was consulted Jobs EQ, which is an online database that pulls census data. And in this case, we really wanted to look at workforce-related data and occupational diversity in terms of age. So first, we looked at all occupations to get age breakdowns for the entire US workforce, then compared all occupations to the government and administration occupations subcluster to see what the differences look like. And in that comparison, we did look US wide at that government and administrative subcluster, and then at California statewide numbers for that cluster as well. So we'll show you the high level data summary for that, and then give a brief overview of what may be keeping Gen Z and millennials out of the government workplace. So next slide. So this data is pulled from first quarter data from 2023, clearly demonstrates what most of us in local government already know, that the government workforce trends to be an older demographic. As you can see in the dark blue representing all occupations. There's more representation in younger age brackets than that government and administrative subcluster. And then that is reversed as you get into those older generations where there's more older generations reflected in the government workforce. So this gives you a good idea of how government skews differently from all occupations across the state and across the country. We did look at local and regional data as well. In California, we looked at, most of the major metropolitan areas such as the Bay Area, LA, Sacramento, those major centers of metropolitan areas. They mirror really closely the California government trends that we see here. We did see some minor variances in some of the more non-metropolitan regions, but the differences didn't seem significant enough for a separate call out for our purposes here. But as I said, this confirms a lot of what we know and really is setting the stage for our conversation today. So Sophie, anything else about this data before we move to the next slide that you wanted to point out?
Well, I did want to point out that the systems that we have in place do impact what happens in the workforce. So we all know that pension systems in California tend to be fairly generous and people can retire quite young. And you can see that government workers nationwide are a little older in general than government workers in California. And so, this isn't just about the workforce. This is about the choices that we make when we set up systems to accommodate and engage or not accommodate and engage our workforce. And I'm not going to pass a value judgment on whether the pension system is good or bad, but that is a result of it.
Great. Thanks. So on the last slide, I really wanted to highlight some of the trends we've seen in our research about what could potentially be keeping Generation Z and younger millennials out of the workforce. So first is just job hopping. Younger generations are more apt to change jobs more frequently and aren't afraid to leave a job when it doesn't suit them. So there's a little bit of a harder time keeping a hold of them if they're not satisfied with the job or the culture that they find themselves in. Benefits, government benefits have fallen behind some in the private sector, especially for these younger people, as Sophia was mentioning, in terms of, overall compensation, benefits, etc. Also rigidity. There's a lot of rigid job descriptions, hiring practices, promotional paths and opportunities, and compensation systems in local government that really are hard for younger generations to wrap their heads around in terms of a clear path forward. I think in many cases there's not a clear linkage to a sense of purpose or how the job actually benefits the community or the pressing issues of concerns to younger generations when they read about what the job is going to do. And then government bureaucracy, there's a lot of tedious paperwork, a lot of long hiring processes and general inefficiencies that plague government in general. And government cultures may not align with what younger generations expectations are around how they do work and how they work with other people in the workplace. And then just lack of technology, not getting to use any of the cool tools they use on a day-to-day basis, tools they used when they were in school, things they might get exposed to in a private sector job. So those are the sort of the high-level trends that we're seeing. We'll dive down into some of these deeper in our discussion later today, I'm sure. But that's just an overview. And for now, I'll pass the baton back.
If I might just add a comment, I think we're going to spend a fair amount of time today talking about your ability as managers to affect what goes on in the workplace. And of course, that is really, really important. And it is the thing you absolutely can do. But there's a lot in this slide that is also within the ability of managers. We select in the public sector for duration and longevity of experience. Well, job hoppers don't really have that. We select benefit systems that load at the end of a career for retirement benefits. But when you're 30 years old and hoping to be able to buy a house, your pension down the road isn't that important, and your ability to do that today kind of matters. So there are structural elements as well as interpersonal elements that affect how our workplaces work or don't work for different generations and the needs that they have. And it's important to pay attention to both of those.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that overview. We're going to spend a little bit of time now kind of talking through the definitions of each generation. So we did a quick poll at the outset to kind of get a sense of who's in the room. But we want to talk about some of those stereotypes that are associated with each of the generations, and what that might look like and how it might manifest in the workplace. And then we're going to do some additional polling about these stereotypes. So I'll hand it over to Debbie to talk through these.
Okay, great. So we gave you these in the Zoom poll, but you know, when you look at these somewhat arbitrary divisions between these generations, some of them are shorter than others, but they tend to sort of be, with the exception of the traditionalists, you know, they can be sort of 15 years, 14 years. That's a long time. You know, when you think about the people who are the youngest and the people who are the oldest in those generations, those people maybe don't fit, you know, don't feel connected to as many people in their quote unquote generation as they do maybe to the younger or to the older. Their perceptions about the world and what's going on at work are perhaps more like younger people or older people, but we thought we would give you these just so that we can sort of frame our discussion. On the next slide, we're going to start talking about what I like to call stereotypes and superpowers. These are assumptions, generalizations that are made about each of the generations. We're going to go through these. I've been collecting these for several years, from articles, from webinars, from conferences. Some are from actual survey data. Others are from anecdotes that people write about. And so this is what happens with stereotypes, is they sort of become part of the way we think about each other. And whether that's good or not, maybe, you know, we can decide as we go through some of these. Keep in mind that our decisions are at exceptions. So how we decide to interact with each other might start with some assumptions about people because of their generation, just like we make assumptions about people perhaps based on their gender. So let's go through these. Traditionalists, sometimes you hear them called the greatest generation. You know, a lot of these people were born just before or during the Depression or the beginning of World War II. So they're stereotypically practical, patient, loyal, hardworking, respectful of authority. They're rule followers. And what I did pick up throughout was that they're resistant to change. The other thing that we're sharing as we go through this, because so much of what happens to get in the way of collaboration and you know, effective teams is communication differences. So let's look at those also. So these folks prefer generally to communicate in person or by letter or on the phone, like live on the phone, not leaving voicemails on the phone. Okay, next we have the baby boomers. We are supposedly optimistic. We have experience and wisdom. We like teamwork and cooperation. We're also ambitious and competitive. We're known for our work ethic, but also for our work-centric nature. We can be workaholics. We've had to adapt to technology at work. We've gone from, you know, typewriters and fax machines to computers and laptops and phones and so forth. And we are also known to be resistant to change. We prefer to communicate live, in group meetings or by phone or even email. Some of us have gotten very comfortable with texting and FaceTiming, but that's apparently not part of the generalization about baby boomers. Okay, next we've got Gen X. Gen X are known to be skeptical, cynical, but self-reliant, independent. They value autonomy, sometimes to a fault. They are risk takers, but they value education. They're comfortable with technology. They're adaptable. They're problem solvers. They are looking to balance work and personal life, but they don't always get to do that. They struggle with that. They prefer generally to communicate by email, phone, or text, less so than in person. Then we've got the millennials. Millennials are known to be hopeful, collaborative. They seek meaningful work. They value diversity and change and are socially responsible. They are very tech savvy. They're actually sometimes overly reliant on technology. They're the ones who are known to be job hoppers. And I would just say, as an aside, for those of us in older generations, we grew up seeing parents, many of them, in a job for most or all of their career, with a sort of two-way loyalty between employees and employers, companies, organizations, agencies. And this generation has grown up seeing their parents lose jobs, get laid off, get force managed out. And so perhaps that contributes to their job hopping, is some of what I've read. They're known to be narcissistic, entitled, and difficult to manage. I think that is a broad sweeping generalization. Also known to have a short attention span, but that could have a connection to the technology thing. Multitasking. They prefer to communicate similarly to Gen X, by text, by messaging, by also social media, and they like FaceTime. Okay. And then we have Gen Z. When you think about each of these generations, so much of what becomes stereotype superpower has a lot to do with what was going on in the world around them when they were, preteens and teenagers, right? And maybe, into their 20s. So kind of that's where we are now with Gen Zers. They're known to be socially responsible, open-minded, and diverse. They have an entrepreneurial spirit, many of them. They have high expectations of the workplace and the people they work with. They are known to be digital natives, even more so than millennials. So they expect to work with modern technology, which is what we just heard Rich and Sophia referencing in, what's keeping younger folks out of government agencies. They want stable work environments, but they also want flexible work environments. They tend to be comfortable breaking away from sort of traditional institutional structures around education, around work, around investing. They're, this goes back to the entrepreneurial sort of open-minded comfort with change. They have an even shorter attention span than millennials, apparently. And if you look at the communication preferences, they're known to be much more impersonal in their communication, probably because of the reliance on technology. These couple of younger generations, you see they don't prefer to do in-person meetings, or even phone calls. But, when you look at all of these, what I'm calling stereotypes and superpowers, they are in some ways they conflict within the list. This is just a collection of emotional reactions, but also some empirical studies and surveys. Most of all, though, it's important to keep in mind that if these stereotypes come into the room with you when you're meeting or working with colleagues from another generation, then your initial perception of them can be clouded. And, you're not kind of meeting them where they actually are. You're meeting them where you're assuming they are. And that can certainly not just block communication, but certainly get in the way of collaboration. Good. Did we want to take some of the questions that are in the Q&A about some of these, or no?
I want to make sure we've got enough time for the discussion. So we are tracking them. We see a bunch of them come in, so keep them coming. And we will, let's get through this chunk and then maybe we can pause for some clarifying questions.
Okay. So the last piece of this conversation about stereotypes is to remember that there are, these generations are divided, as I was saying, a little bit arbitrarily. And if you see these multiple factors that are laid out in this book, which I highly recommend, that talks about these other things that can kind of shape our perceptions and our attitudes. The cohort effect is the one that's about people, your cohort, your generation are people who are born within a certain time frame. But these other two things, the period effects, are things like the pandemic, something that we're all experiencing, we're all living through, or depending on what age you were with the 2008 financial crisis, that could certainly impact your attitudes and behavior about work. Life cycle effects, things like major life milestones. Are you married? When did you leave home? Did you go to college? Do you have children? Were your parents divorced? These kinds of things. What kind of work did your parents do? These things, period effects and life cycle effects, can actually give you more common ground with people of other generations than the people within your cohort, the people born within that time frame. So it's important to keep in mind that you could have as much in common with younger or older people, or maybe more, than you do with people who are around your age. Okay.
Perfect. I think the only kind of clarifying question that I want to add here before we get into the next round of polling is some folks are interested in maybe additional data. And so I don't know if there's anywhere you guys can send, maybe if there's some links that we can put in the chat, or we can definitely add some to the follow-up email. But it sounds like there's definitely interest in more data. So
there are tons
there.
of articles that we can share, that where I've collected some of those stereotypes and superpowers from, but yeah, that we can definitely give you plenty of data.
Perfect. And on the employment side too, in terms of obviously the job EQ data that you all pulled, but if there's other sources there, it'd be fantastic. Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for that overview. We now want to hear from you all as an audience again. So we just went through some of the stereotypes and superpowers. I love that framing, Debbie. So we want to hear from you all in terms of what of those stereotypes would you just love to get rid of, or doesn't resonate with you all as a generation. So we got some additional polling we're going to launch here. Okay, so I think you see that pop up. So first we're talking about traditionalists.
So what we know is there was a traditionalist on the line. So if we could just ask you by yourself which one you'd like to get rid of, that would be kind of fun. But I think for the rest of us, think about your parents or your grandparents, and they're maybe traditionalists. Which of those stereotypes do you think is just ridiculous, just doesn't even apply to them, right? And if somebody was working with your mom or your dad, what would you want to tell them to drop, to let go of?
And you will see we also have an other category here. So if you were one of the folks choosing that other selection, please drop into the chat for us what that other would be, and we'll keep an eye on that too. Because we know this is not a exhaustive list of things that I'm sure you've all heard about each generation. So
hey, I'll tell you, my parents are traditionalists. They're 91 and both still working, and neither of them is respectful of authority, which made it really hard for me as first generation corporate to learn to be respectful of authority. So I'd get rid of that one.
Love the anecdote. Okay, most people give this another couple seconds in case you want to drop an answer in.
Somebody was just asking my generation. I was born in 1960. I'm a boomer. I'm the end of the sort of the bottom end of the boomers.
Yeah, so that question did come up. So if we wanted to share, I myself am an elder millennial. Rich and Sophia, if you want to share your generations while we're waiting for people to chime in here.
I am the cutting edge of Gen X.
I'm Gen X. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we'll go ahead and end this one because we've got them for each of the generations. I want to make sure we have time here. So overwhelmingly, folks think that resistant to change is the one that they disagree with or would like to get rid of for the traditionalist generation. Also see quite a few votes for patient and practical. And then Seth is keeping an eye on the chat. What came in there?
So, well, also nothing's coming in the chat. So just a reminder, if you do have, well, first of all, hello everybody. My name is Seth Yund. I'm helping out on the back end, and I'm with the Institute for Local Government. Just because it seems to be something that we're doing. I'm on the cutting edge of Millennial and Gen Z, so that's where I stand. And I just want to flag that this might not be the most accurate poll. I saw a lot of people jumping on it as soon as it was launched, and then I saw some of the answers trickle backwards as soon as more explanation was given that this is not what we think the stereotypes are, but the stereotypes that we would like to get rid of. So just flagging that there might, but nevertheless, I think folks have had enough time to re-engage their answers. But just a reminder, the other, with respect to other, if that's your answer, feel free to send us in the chat any responses that you have in terms of stereotypes that you don't think fit with this, and we will be happy to read some of examples out as we move forward. And we'll be doing stereotypes for each of the generations in turn. So just be ready to continue to follow that format.
And thanks for the flag, Seth. Yes, so all of these questions that we're asking about each of the generations is which one you'd like to get rid of, or you disagree with, or you don't think resonates with you, if that's your generation, or again, your parents or your peers, whomever resonates there. So let's get the next one up. We will launch on baby boomers. Okay, so same question about the baby boomer generation.
So if you could wave a magic wand, which stereotype would you get rid of? Because it just doesn't feel like a fit for the baby boomers, you know. I saw a question come up saying, which one do we wish they weren't? That they, you know, which one could we tell them to stop being? Which is a different question.
An interesting question too, but
exactly. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that in the discussion.
I have some thoughts there. My parents are baby boomers, so no.
Well, you know, while people are doing this, there were a couple of comments that came in about traditionalists having been through so much change. And that is very true, you know, honoring what they've been through in their lifetimes, how much change they've seen. I don't know many who are resistant to change, actually. So I was glad to see that one was a big number.
Perfect. Most folks responding here. I'll give this just another second or two. Do you have any thoughts on boomers? And again, if you are hitting other, if you want to share anything in the chat, please do. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this one so we can keep moving. But let's see here. So this one's a little bit more split. Lots of votes for slow to adapt to technology. Lots of votes for resistant to change here as well, followed by teamwork and cooperation, and then optimistic. Did we get any notes in the chat, Seth, on this one?
Apologies. No, we did get a mention, and one that I appreciate, that individual preferences are always worth considering. I reworded that a little bit, but that's all that we have for this one.
Thank you.
Yes, and you know, we have a comment that came in. Thank you for flagging the quote unquote Generation Jones, because in the boomer generation, it is such a big chunk of time. Those last 5 years, you know, like 59 to 64, has sometimes been called Generation Jones because we tend to have sort of a lot in common with one another, and maybe even more like Gen X than like the older boomers. So thanks for flagging that. Yeah.
The same question for Gen X. It seems there's quite a few of those micro generations. I've heard myself called the early 80s called the Oregon Trail generation, which I kind of love. I remember playing Oregon Trail as a elementary school kid. So
Interesting. You know, on that last one about boomers, I hope you don't mind if I'm just filling the air here while we're waiting for people to vote. The slow to adapt to technology and the not so great with collaboration. I was kind of glad to see those as higher numbers, because I think those generalizations, maybe younger people looking at older people, is something that we can fix together. It might just be that, in some industries, maybe it's not so true in government agents. In some industries, boomers are a lot harder when it comes to collaboration across generational lines. At least that's been our experience. But I was glad to see those two were high. So what do we have for Gen X?
yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and close this one out. We got most people, and we'll share these results. So a lot of votes for skeptical and cynical. Independent worker is high on there, as well as struggles with balancing work and personal life. Do we have any other comments on this one?
No comments.
Okay.
Wow, we have two Gen Xers here.
Yeah, any reflections on this? Well, I'm going to go ahead and launch the millennial one. If you guys want to share any of your thoughts on the on Gen X. This one does not want to let me launch. There we go. Sophia, Rich, any thoughts on your generation's reflections in the polling?
I mean, I think, generational categories are really challenging and in general. So I think it's hard to get pigeonholed one way or the other. I think there's plenty of Gen X people that I work with that aren't skeptical. But skepticism is probably shaped by the experiences of the cohort, just like other generations, I think. And you look at what these Gen X was dealing with when they were growing up. There was a lot of mistrust in government during the times that they were growing up, and skepticism in general. So I think that can be a characteristic, but not necessarily defines everybody within that category.
Definitely.
Well, I think Deb's reflection here on the last slide of other factors that impact and shape who you are is really important to keep in mind. My husband and I were both born the same year, but my parents are 10, 12 years older than his parents. So they were from a very different generation. And, he and I were raised quite differently in a lot of ways. And it shows in our thought processes and sort of our assessment of things. So, that's not an age thing. That's a who raised you thing. And that's important to know too.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah, we lean way too much on these cohort effects and stereotypes, and getting to know one another and thinking about these other two factors is really important.
So I think, unsurprisingly, as part of as being part of this generation, The narcissistic and entitled and difficult to manage does not resonate. But also a lot of votes for overly reliant on technology, and then collaborative to some extent, which I also feel I do not feel like I understand technology as much as I should sometimes. So, all right, we got one more, and then we'll get back to the conversation.
I like the comment I just saw. Who raised you? That's
the baby.
how often do we say that in the workplace?
My parents are both baby boomers, so. All right, so we got Gen Z up now. It's the last one we will ask about, because I don't think we know enough about alpha in the workplace, since they're mainly toddlers at this point, I think. So
Exactly. Gen Z is 95 to 2012. So
elementary school, yeah.
Yeah.
Give this another minute or two. We'll keep moving.
I will say about the millennials, since my 3 daughters are millennials, a lot of the stereotypes, particularly the one we all just wanted to wave our magic wand at, have the baby boomer parents' fingerprints all over them.
You said it, not me. No,
I know it. Everybody must have a trophy. No one should feel bad. Everybody should be heard. We, to some degree, created some of the circumstances that maybe feed that stereotype, if it's presenting itself. Not with my daughters, of course.
Of course not. Okay, perfect. A lot more split on this one.
Yeah.
But a lot of votes for the impersonal communication, short attention spans, the breaking away from institutional structures for education. And then like you can see now, there's just a lot of votes across the board for these ones.
Yeah. But that impersonal communication one, that when I ask this question, that one tends to be the third rail for Gen Zers. And the conversation we have to have then is, why do you think people feel that way about the way you communicate, and particularly if you're communicating with older people who we just saw, traditionalist boomers, to some degree Gen Xers, like in-person or live communication, the fact that you won't do it, the fact that you won't pick up the phone when you're texting me and I call you, feels impersonal, right? So how do we break through that? How do we communicate and as a Gen Zer, how do you communicate and let people feel that it's more personal? That's something that you have to talk about.
Well, I think that's a great segue into, or did the Zoom poll, into our panel discussion. So like we've flagged a couple of times, we've seen quite a few questions come in, so we'll intermix some of the prepared questions we had with some of the questions that you all have, and we'll get to as many as we can. But I've also seen you all responding to questions in the chat, and feel free to follow up with us after the fact if we don't get to your question or it's more technical around some of the retirement questions and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share so we can actually see everybody. And to kick us off, just kind of to build on the comments you were just making, what are some of the benefits that you all are seeing of multi-generational workforces? So you all run teams and manage teams. What are you seeing as some of the positives of this challenging experience that some of us are facing, and how can managers maybe lean into that? So what are some of the positives you're seeing? How can we make this good?
Well, I'll start out by saying I certainly see an incredible amount of value in the diversity of skills and knowledge and experiences and perspectives that people bring. There are genuine differences between people's point of view about a lot of things that happen in our local governments and in our workplaces, and to have that dialogue, I think, gives us a better product and a better ability to engage with and serve our communities. And if we didn't have that, we would be missing a lot.
Yeah, I'm going to echo what Sophia said because I think, all local government works to help communities grow, and to do that as best as they can, they need input from the diverse communities that they serve. And so, the more your teams can be representative of that diversity along lots of categories, but including age, the more reflective your solutions will be of the community you're trying to serve. So I think that's something that's really beneficial when you have a multi-generational team.
For sure. For sure. The perspectives of the people in the agency, if they are as diverse as the community you're serving, then you'll be reflecting what's out there as opposed to guessing at what's out there, who you need to serve.
And I think in general, just having an array. Okay, so that was about communities that we serve, and that was really nice and really important, but also the work experience is vastly improved by having people who bring different skills. I was verifying I-9s in person yesterday because the federal government requires us to do that with all of our hires that we verified virtually. And our team had set up a beautiful DocuSign and share file thing that I could do one on my computer with the internet and the other with my phone. And it was so much better than paper, the old fashioned way, which is what I was doing the last time I did I-9 verifications. I was like, this is awesome. And I needed people in my organization with that skill set because my skill is to sign the DocuSign thing, not to set up the system. So, that was really amazing to me and made it so much faster and easier to do.
Some of the same principles we think about when we think about community engagement, right, can apply here, that you really want to make sure you know who's in your community and who you're trying to serve. And are your strategies for engagement and your strategies for recruitment, are they aligning, and are they reaching all of those folks, the breadth of our communities from an age perspective and others, definitely. So would like to
The
spend
way
One thing I did want to mention, Melissa, was,
Please.
just that combination of expectation and what we can deliver on. Because, during the pandemic, people got accustomed to doing things digitally and remotely through systems. They want to see local government reflect the way they can do things on all their apps, so bridging sort of the technical know-how, the sort of the technological know-how with the expertise of maybe more senior people, to sort of merge those together into a service that can be responsive in the way that people want to access services, is really important. And that's
Yeah.
one way that multi-generational teams can really help.
The other thing is that the more ideas you have about how to do things more efficiently, more effectively, the more innovation and efficiency we can have. So, the way we've always done things isn't necessarily the best way to accomplish whatever the objective is. And if we get stuck in our ways and we don't sort of clean off the window of our assumptions about how we do things, we could be missing opportunities to do things better. And that's where younger people's ideas, newer higher people can give us ideas because it's a fresh set of eyes. But likewise, throwing out the old way just because it's the old way isn't necessarily good either. And so having respect for the idea that all ideas are important contributions is kind of the place to start for innovation.
Perfect. Would love to spend a little bit of time talking about maybe the flip side of that question too. And I think we've started to have this conversation a little bit in terms of what some of the challenges are, and how can managers maybe be better prepared to navigate that and support teams through some of those challenges. Because I just saw a question or comment come in that, some of those stereotypes are based in
real experience. Absolutely.
Real experience. And so there may be a need to overcome some of that. And so what are your thoughts on, what are some of the challenges you've seen arise, and how have you maybe been able to overcome them or support teams to overcome some of those challenges that come with a diverse team?
Well, I saw in the chat, one of our attendees had said that, you know, dealing with the individual is really important. And while stereotypes give us a quick snapshot, they are not the truth about any one person. And we really need to make an effort to communicate directly with the people involved in our workspace about who they are and what they're bringing and why they're there. I mean, we hired people to bring a certain value to our workspace. So let's talk about this member of the team is valued for their 35 years of knowledge of a very intricate system. Yeah, they can't text very well, but you know what? If you sit down and have a conversation and pick their brain, you'll learn so much. So, you know, respect goes both ways, right? We all bring something valuable to the table, and we need to surface that for our teams and talk specifically about what are the members of the team here to add, and how is that of value to all of us, and how can we, you know, respectfully put those pieces together into a product that's what we want it to be.
Right. I mean, this
Yeah.
really, in many ways, starts with the manager of the team. And the manager sets, you know, creates the environment in which what Sophia just described can either happen or not happen. And that takes deliberate, proactive work from the manager. It's not going to happen by itself. These are, you know, training sessions that we can do. I'm sure Sophia and Rich do with managers, first heightening their awareness of these issues, right? But then role playing with, how do you get somebody to think differently? How do you get someone to share when they're afraid to share or feel even threatened to share? You know, how do you create psychological safety in your team? How do you make it okay to try something new and make a mistake? It's really got to start with the manager learning and exploring and also being safe to make mistakes. You know, that comes from the leader above the team manager. So that it's not going to happen by itself.
Yeah, and I would just add to that that I think, you know, I agree with what's been said about the different assessments and styles, you know, generational styles. It's a starting point for a conversation, but it's a way to sort of help us manage complexity, but it's the start of a conversation. So asking, you know, you might set your team down if you have a multi-generational team that's either not working well together or you want to work well together, and ask them to think about, for their generational categories, what do they think is and isn't true for them individually, and how those elements, you know, are a starting point for that conversation. Then ask them to identify things in other generations that are true for them as well. And that way you sort of create that connection and cohesion of shared understanding, shared values, so that you can work towards getting work done in a way that's not so divisive, but more unifying.
We have to
Tackling the
get
conversation head on, going back to the communication conversation,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Tackling it head on, having those conversations, letting people individually assess where they are and what maybe holds true, to dismiss some of the preconceived notions, right?
Exactly. I mean, you can kind of have fun with those lists that we just sort of had fun with, right?
Exactly. And I think
You
that's
can,
a good point, Debbie. It's like, have fun with this, you know, like don't run away from it and you know, run away from whatever tensions might be brewing, but have fun and do something unexpected, you know, bring something up with your team that they might not be used to talking about, and get a conversation started.
right. My coaching with a manager would start with, you have to go first, right? So if you managers on this call take those slides and have some fun, you know, end of the day with your team, whether it's in person or like this or in a hybrid way, you go first. Do what I did about baby boomers, or what I did about my children. You know, get people to see the humor in poking holes in these stereotypes. And then you can sort of settle into, okay, so what is it that we want to wave our magic wand and stop assuming about each other on this team? And then as you were just saying, I think, Melissa, you were just saying this, having an understanding about the communication differences has to be part of that conversation, because that's actually what we have found in these sessions. That's where some of the stereotypes actually are true. So, and that's okay. But we have to then say, okay, here's what I'm comfortable with, right? I love meetings. I want to see your faces. I want your camera to be on, or I want once a month to be together in a room. Can we negotiate that? And then, you tell me what you need from me, and, I'll learn to be more comfortable with texting or whatever, Slack, something, right? But that conversation about honoring our differences in what communication we feel comfortable with, that's the beginning, right?
Related to this communication conversation, we also got a question about training for staff, and should there be an overlay of thinking about, again, how people communicate and absorb information. What are your thoughts on training programs for different generations or different segments of the workforce? Any thoughts or guidance? Maybe Rich, I'll start with you, since I know this is your house.
I mean, that's such a big question. There are so many training options that are available for whatever the needs of the individual are, right? There's the sort of, like, we do a lot of leadership development academies at a variety of levels. And so we have something for our analyst boot camp. We have something all the way for middle managers at the top, that sort of focus on their specific skill sets. But I think there's also just the commonalities that exist across all those levels. And I think some of the most important things that you can train yourself on if you're going to be successful with a multi-generational workforce is the variety of communication skills that's necessary to engage with other people. So, talking about, sure, public speaking, presentation skills are important, but also facilitation skills, mediation skills, negotiation, problem solving skills. How do you get people to work together? Because the bottom line is the technology tools are getting so advanced now that they're going to take on so many of the technical tasks. It's going to be, how do we get work done together and collaborate? So, if you're really wanting to dive into this and work with people and get work done with people, then you really need to learn how to manage that effectively. And so I think the key skill is just any sort of communications related skill that's going to serve you no matter what your role is in an agency. But if you have technical or level specific needs, like you're new, you like our analyst boot camp is for a new analyst or a management analyst. It's like, yes, definitely go to that. We're going to cover communication as part of that. But you can also sort of focus your training based on what your individual needs are around things such as communication. So
Right. So yeah, so definitely underscoring the communication skills kind of across the board. In terms of the types of programming or the types of training that you might offer, does that this question is specifically asking, should there be a variation in, maybe the types of training that is offered to baby boomers versus Gen Z, based on some of these communication preferences and things like that? Have you all come across that, or seen different types of training programs for different
I think there are
styles, maybe?
differences in training that are targeted at different things. I mean, cognitive diversity is, I think, a foundational and well understood element in traditional knowledge-based training and education. But there's a lot more that you can use. It just takes a different kind of effort. I have found that coaching at all levels, all kinds of staff, in the last 10 years or so of my career, is so effective at helping people understand what it is that we're here to do together and how we're going to do it effectively. And you couldn't teach the things that I'm talking with people about in a classroom, nor could you have them have the faith that they should try this out and it will work well for them if you just were standing up and presenting. So That's not something we think of as a training methodology, but I think there are some skills that we're talking about here that are not just learning a thing, but they're how to take that thing and deploy it usefully in the world with a range of other people. And that may require us to do some very, very different approaches to what is training and how much am I prepared to invest in it.
I think too, it can be more powerful when paired, right? It's like you can go away and learn a topic, but then you pair that with coaching and think about, okay, I've learned this concept. How am I going to implement this in the workplace? And, get some experience guidance around that from a coach who can help you understand the process for how to approach a problem solving, solve a problem.
Right. Perfect.
One of the most important techniques in coaching is role playing when it comes to, particularly with newer managers. You're safe. It's just us. Let's try this out. Right. Having difficult conversations, I would say, is one of, the top issues for not just new managers, all managers. And particularly if it's about someone's performance, if you're only having that conversation once a year or twice a year, you've just made it harder. So if in the coaching, you can get comfortable with, I'm going to have one-on-ones with my people every other week, whether it's this way or in person, break the difficult stuff down into bite-sized pieces. And then you're also more familiar with each other, right? Let's focus on one thing that's really been great and another thing that you need my help with. What can I do? How can I help you? But if you can role play that before you do it for real, then you're learning these techniques in a kind of in a safe space. And I think that's the best way to learn, right? Somebody can listen to a lecture, but until they apply it in real life, they haven't really taken it on board, right? So, if you can teach someone else what you've just learned, it helps cement it. But also, if you can try it out, pretend with a coach or, role play with someone who's not your direct report or not your manager, it's a safer way to learn.
So in obviously a lot of the local governments on the line are probably feeling this too, but with the retirement wave upon us at this point in time, there is a lot of new managers and younger generations kind of stepping into some of those leadership roles. And so I think that's a great suggestion, but Rich, Sophia, would love to open it up to you all to hear any other suggestions you have for newer managers navigating people who are maybe have more seniority than they have, or maybe they used to be your peer and now you're their manager, and that's an awkward scenario to step into. So I think the role playing is a great example, as well as kind of the one-on-ones and the consistent conversation. And that's something I've found to be effective managing projects myself. But Rich, Sophia, any other thoughts on some guidance for new managers, or as maybe you're a more senior manager trying to mentor a more junior manager? Any thoughts in that space?
I think that all managers, whether they're young managers managing older folks or older managers managing younger folks, have this temptation to say, you should do it like I would, and it looks like this. So whether it's the old school way or the new school way, we want to say that. But there are many, many paths to accomplishing desired outcomes. There are very few things that are desired outcomes that there's only one way to get there. And it's really important that we all agree on what it is we're trying to do here. What is our desired outcome? And then we can talk about the path. My path looks like this, and here's why I chose that path. And someone else's path might look a little different. If it gets them there without extraordinary time and expense and heartburn, why should they not be allowed to follow that path? Now, we do have some challenges around getting there without extraordinary effort and heartburn, because there are really great technologies these days that we have to all be in, or they don't work very well, right? So I've had that challenge in my own career where older workers are like, I don't want to learn the technology. And I'm like, well, see, it's not going to work if you don't use it. and everybody else is using it. So you're going to not have a job pretty soon, not because I'm firing you, but because the work's all in the machine and you have to go in there and do it. And some folks have said, okay, I hear you on that, and I'm still making the choice I'm making. And some folks have said, okay, so I understand the world has shifted and we aren't going to be able to do it that way. How can I participate effectively? And those are personal choices that people are allowed to make, but you have to have that conversation respectfully, and you have to have a real reason, not just my preference.
And I would just add to that, I think, having curiosity and being curious about learning and is part and having respect as well. I started my role in training working with trainers who have longer and more storied careers than I do in local government. And, it's like I get curious, I get really excited about hearing what their experiences have been, how they've implemented these massive systemic programs in their agencies and figuring out how to translate that for other people. But you have to approach that from a humble perspective, from a respectful place, and try to get the work done that you're trying to accomplish. That's what I try. And if I have a question, if I need help understanding something, I seek support. I go to the people that may have more experience than I do, not just within my department, but with our larger agency. RGS has untold experience under its belt with all the advisors that do work for us in helping support other local governments, and they are a constant source of information. And so utilize it, call them up, have a conversation, figure out ways to engage and get information from people, that are really going to help you deliver the best product or service that you're providing.
I think this great advice from both of you. I think from a succession planning standpoint, we should be promoting younger managers who think like Rich. That curiosity, humility, if you respect that everyone on your team is older than you and has more tenure and knows a lot, and you come into it saying that, you immediately command their respect. They need to feel that they're still useful and that you respect that they've done all this stuff while you were in high school, And I think that's an important part of succession planning. If you have young people who are really great at what they do, like we love to promote people because they're great at what they do. That doesn't mean they're a good manager. But if you have younger people who think like we just heard Rich talking, they should be at the top of the list for succession planning.
I just like to add from my HR hat, you've all heard about accommodation for disability, right? So we work around somebody's restrictions. I think as younger managers, it's possible to work around some of the challenges of working with older workers. I was working 10 or 12 years ago, doing some labor negotiations with an interim city manager who did not use the computer. He hand wrote everything on paper. But his thoughts were really great, and his strategy was really great, and his ability to deal with the people involved was really great. And I was like, give me your handwritten notes and I will type those for you, because your thoughts are worth having and everybody needs them. And the best way to get them to everybody is for me to do that. So that was, I didn't have to do that every day, my whole life long. That might have gotten a little tiring, but for a short project that we had together, it was a very worthwhile accommodation of who he was.
Even thinking about different ways to approach the work. But I love all this advice, and I'm going to take all of this to heart.
Excellent example, Sophia.
I think too, one last point, if I
Yes,
could make
please.
it, is, try to be intentional about creating multi-generational teams if you can. You might have a team, you might, figure out ways to get, if you don't have younger people on your team, to get younger people on your team, or to hear perspectives from younger people. And that might be, an internship program. I started my career as an intern at a state agency. And ever since then, I've tried to have intern involvement in programs, because it's a way to infuse younger perspectives into the work that you're doing, even if you don't have a formal position that you can offer. You know, it's sort of it can be a short-term win-win situation, where you get, you know, people from different generations participating and talking together. You know, with our trainers, I try to pair our really experienced trainers with our instructional designers and our instructional design interns who's right out of college, you know, and get them working together. And it's always usually a better product because, you know, those two mindsets coming together create something that resonates with more people in general. And, you know, when we deliver the training products, we see that it's representative of lots of different viewpoints and perspectives. So
I think you were reading my mind, because the next question I was going to ask was, how do we get young folks more interested in local government and government as a career path? We saw some of the barriers you flagged, Rich, at the beginning, and I think a lot of those definitely hold a lot of weight in terms of the challenges that our local government partners are facing. But what are thought and internship programs, I think, are a fantastic option to consider. That's where I started my career, with the federal government. So that's definitely something to consider, and can be a potentially low cost solution. But what are some other ideas you all have about either reducing barriers to entry for younger folks, or even just making it more exciting or more inviting for the younger generations?
Well, I think flexibility and work-life balance are probably more important to younger people than they ever have been. Some of the conversations I have with workers under 40 in our organization are not ideas that would have even occurred to me at the beginning of my career. That wasn't how you thought about work and life. And so public agencies do tend to be quite rigid and inflexible, but we do this to ourselves. This is self-inflicted damage. We are not obliged. All of work is a box that we decide about, and we can change the shape of it, and we can change the boundaries of it, and we can decide that a full-time employment is 30 hours a week instead of 40, and we can decide that this person can only do this part of the job because that's what they have time for, and then they're going to go home, and somebody else can be hired to do the other part of the job, because it is possible to find people who both love that and want to contribute only to that level and then be done. And it takes, again, a little bit of effort. And sometimes we worry about, are we being fair if we're offering jobs that don't look the same? Treating everybody identically is not fair. We are not identical people, and to impose the same treatment on all of us is unfair to all of us. So equity is very important, but identicality is counterproductive. And I know that's a hard thing to think about in a union environment. Sometimes it's hard to negotiate. And sometimes we think about trying to explain what we did to the DFEH and we're like, oh, but it's really important to open up those boxes and re-examine, where have we set up barriers that we did to ourselves, and we could move them and we could have a better outcome.
You know, as an outsider, I would say that you are all working in a state where what you can do locally and at the county level can be really impactful for people. And if any of those superpowers are true about, you know, the younger generations, engage them on the social change and the diversity and the, you know, the making the world a better place part of the purpose, the mission of what you do in your agencies. I think some of that, we as older people, we take for granted. Like, of course, that's what we're doing. But if you aren't articulating it proactively, younger people may not know that. You know, California, maybe they do, but, you know, we live in a world right now where government isn't necessarily pushing for social change and caring for individuals and honoring differences. So I would say work with that if you want to hold on to young people or engage young people.
And I would just add to that just the importance of cultivating sort of a sense of belonging in the agency. We've been through so much collective change, and one of our trainers who teaches our class on organizational culture and change shared this study from the American Immigration Council about belonging in the US. And 64% of Americans report non-belonging in the workplace.
Yep.
68% non-belonging in the nation, 74% in their communities. So, we're facing this time where people are feeling more disconnected. And so how can we make our workplaces have a better sense of belonging and connecting, collaborating, building a strong organizational culture, to make sure that people in younger generations feel connected to the purpose of the work and why we're all here to get work done. So, you know, things that are really important to Gen Z, are transparency, um, diversity, empathy, work-life balance, and all that is sort of part of that whole belonging bubble. And how do we create a workplace that people want to come and spend their time at? So
Absolutely.
Yeah, so hearing flexibility, particularly in a post-COVID world, the messaging, just how we talk about local government, how we talk about these positions, how we promote the positions, and then the culture piece. Once you have them in, how do you keep them? And I think, Rich, that's what you're speaking to in terms of making sure that everybody belongs, everybody feels that they are part of the organization and are really moving that mission forward. Going back to some of the stereotypes about Gen Z and millennials and really wanting to be passionate about the work and working for that cause. That's something I've heard that does actually resonate with me as a millennial, and I think a lot of my colleagues feel the same way. So definitely some things to think about as our local government partners are recruiting. And definitely want to acknowledge for the folks on the line that all of this is easier said than done. The boundaries that
very
have been put on
challenging.
local government can take a long time to move, and the culture changes can be hard to navigate and can be a long shift. But love the ideas and the comments here. I'm going to pop back over to our slide deck since doing a quick check on the time, and we're getting kind of close and want to share some additional resources with you all. So Deb, I'm going to have you go through this and talk about some of these tips, and then we'll share some additional resources with the attendees.
Sure. We've, I think, talked about most of these. Challenge your own assumptions about other generations, creating psychological safety for sharing ideas and raising concerns. That's all about belonging. Exactly what Rich was just talking about. Secret ingredient to engaging employees. If you feel that you belong, you feel safe to share your ideas, safe to learn, safe to make mistakes, safe to challenge the status quo, you'll stick around and you'll contribute. We've talked about communication preferences, building trust by looking for common ground. One of the fun things you can do, I mean, aside from picking at those stereotypes, is ask people what they did in high school, what was their favorite extracurricular activity. It's amazing how much common ground you can find across generations with questions like that. And then finally, try non-traditional mentoring. So reverse mentoring, for example, where the younger person is mentoring the older person. Works well with technology. Why not also give people some feedback about how they're communicating, younger to older? And those are two articles that I've written, co-authored with colleagues of mine in Harvard Business Review. The first one has a lot of these ideas, several others. And the second one is about why psychological safety is sort of the secret ingredient for resilience and effectiveness in teams. So thanks for letting me share that.
No, thank you. And we will share we will share links to both of those articles. Obviously they're here on the slide deck when you get that, but we'll provide direct links to them in the follow-up emails as well. Just want to share some additional recent things that have come out of ILG and some work that we're embarking on. So the links you see on the page here are some recent toolkits and case studies and things like that we've done around youth in particular, and really encouraging younger generations to engage in local government and consider it as a career path. So those are some resources for you all. And then as I just mentioned, we're also embarking on some broader work in this space to really dig into some of the challenges that we've been talking about on today's webinar, examining some of the systems and what are the barriers to having a more diverse workforce, and what are some of the levers that we can pull to maybe change some of that and decrease some of those barriers. Are we thinking about it from a community engagement standpoint? So how are we talking to the community about local government? How are we engaging them in some of these conversations? And again, that promotional piece about job postings, are we doing that? And we'll also be pulling together some additional data around some of these local government workforce trends and things of that nature. So stay tuned for more if this is an interest of yours, which I'm guessing it might be if you're on today's call. But there'll be a lot more coming out of ILG around that space, and then apprenticeships in the local government and public sector space over the next 12, 18 months. So stay tuned for more. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will be sharing the recording and the materials from this presentation in the next few days. So you will receive a direct link to that, and it will all be on our website. Just a quick plug for ILG. If you aren't connected with us, here's our social media channels, our newsletter list. This is a way to stay on top of some of this work that we're doing and be aware of other trainings or resources that we're putting out for our local government partners. And I'll put up our contact information here. So again, please follow up with us if you have outstanding questions. But I'd love to do just a really quick round robin as a closeout for all of our panelists. That, what would be a good first step for new managers looking to manage or that are going into managing a multi-generational team? What's one maybe resource or training, or what would be that first step you would suggest? To put you on the spot in the last 2 minutes of our webinar.
I'm happy to share one, but I just shared a whole.
Go, Deb. Go.
Okay. This is going to feel like it's out of left field, but stick with me. Do some mindfulness training. Learn to take a breath between when something pushes a button and how you react, because in that space is where the change can happen. So I love using a meditation app called 10% Happier. That's how I learned to meditate 5 or 6 years ago, I guess. But learning to have that space between the trigger and the reaction as a new manager, I think is probably really important to doing all that other stuff that we've been kicking around.
Totally agree with you there. And I would add, get to know yourself. Who am I? What do I think is important and why? Because this is me, and I need to communicate it to you so you understand how to work well with me. But I also need to understand this is me, not you. And I shouldn't necessarily assume or expect the same things from you. Maybe I can, once I'm a little self-aware, ask you to reflect and tell me about you.
Oh, love that.
Sophia, you took the words out of my mouth. That was what I was going to say, but I think it is really important to just keep developing yourself too, like understanding what makes you tick. The more you understand what makes you tick, the more you'll help other people understand what makes them tick and work together towards a common purpose there. I agree with that 100%.
I love that we've worked together so long. We are one mind.
Perfect. Well, we are at time, so I just want to thank all of you for joining us, spending some of your afternoon with us if you're on the line. And I hope you join me in thanking our panelists for sharing their insights and experiences with us. Really appreciate you all, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.